What mistakes do pastors make?
How long do we have? Oh, my gosh.
Acts 4, the Pharisees and Sanhedrin and all.
Well, it's
Challenge.
mostly Sanhedrin. It's not much Pharisees
Okay.
there, right?
So the Sanhedrin combined, everybody.
Yeah, because Luke likes to group people together,
All right.
as John does. John will start talking about Pharisees, and the next thing you know, it's Jews. I think Matthew starts the process when Mark talks about people coming for baptism. Which
Right.
is fine. Matthew throws in Pharisees and Sadducees coming in together. So,
Right.
oh, well, that's not in Mark. Luke has his own take on Pharisees, kind of nasty in the gospel, really quite darling in the book of Acts for the most part, as if to say, maybe this negative view is not going to be terribly helpful as the church begins to grow.
Right.
Maybe we
Yeah.
ought to consider some Pharisees who have joined the church. Oh, like Paul.
Yeah.
So Pharisees become a fairly problematic topic.
Oh. What is the one thing that you wish most Baptist preachers understood about the Pharisees?
To stop using them as negative examples. There are books out today, I think some by Baptists, like You Might Be a Pharisee If,
Yeah.
and it's
yeah.
always quite negative. I can't imagine, you might be a Baptist if, and then you have a list of 25 hypocritical things.
Right.
Yeah, and you could probably write one of those. There's one book out now that talks about the Pharisees as the uber liberals. And we have to go back to good old conservative values. And there's another
Yeah.
book that talks about the Pharisees, the uber conservatives, and we have to be a little bit more liberal, which shows me that Christians are simply deploying the Pharisees to make them be the bad guys,
Right, yeah.
regardless of where you happen to stand on social issues.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're called a Pharisee, it is not a term of endearment.
There is in Germany and in Austria a drink called a Pharisayer, and they're actually little cups with Pharisayer written on it. And it looks like a cappuccino or something like it. But it's
Right.
got a couple of shots of alcohol in it. So the idea is you want to look like you're just having a decent cup of coffee, but you hypocrite, you're really just, knocking one back.
Yeah. Don't tell that to my Baptist friends. They'll be ordering that cup. So
Well, anything with whipped cream on the top, you ought to be careful with.
all this stuff.
Yeah.
Some of that. All right. Of all the books you have written, and AJ, you have written 2 pages worth of books here and articles that we can't even count, are the book on the Pharisees that you gave us, and this one, Jesus for Everyone.
You got to give the subtitle.
Not just for Christians.
Not just Christians.
Not
right?
just Christians. Tell me why you wrote this book.
I've written a couple of books on Jesus already, but what I continue to find is, particularly in more recent political climates, Jesus being deployed to say whatever the politician wants,
Right.
without any historical background whatsoever. So you're completely yanked out of context and made to serve basically as a soundbite. And I think Jesus deserves better. So the question that drove the book is, I'm not asking what would Jesus do, because I don't think that's a terribly helpful question. Jesus doesn't live in a participatory democracy with social media. But what can the stories told by Jesus, like parables, and what can the stories told about Jesus, like the Gospels, how can they inform us on current social issues like family values or discussions of slavery, which have become quite fraught recently, because Jesus actually says quite a lot about slavery and tells stories about slaves, about self and other, who are the insiders and who are the outsiders, and how do we relate to them. So I'm looking at fraught cultural issues to say, it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not, it doesn't matter whether you worship Jesus as Lord and Savior, or in fact, you may never have heard of him, but these stories can be helpful to you. And if we can use the gospel stories to help think our way through some of these problems, then we're in a better position to have the conversations that need to be had.
The thing that I loved about this book is growing up as I did in a traditional Southern Baptist church. On one hand, we're told Jesus is like us. And that's one of the saving points about Jesus, is he's fully human. but we're really told that he's divine and he's not like you, and he is without sin, and all of this. The teachings here that and the application you draw really emphasize the humanity of Jesus, the realness of Jesus,
Right, in his own historical setting.
In his own historical setting.
Absolutely. Which means that if you're a believer in Jesus, I'm not questioning any of that high Christology, the technical term. I'm not questioning whether he's God, whether he's divine, whether he's the Messiah. If you believe that stuff, all that stuff stays in place. This can only enhance it.
Well, that's where it is. This is Jesus, the real man in his real time.
Absolutely, as best as we can determine.
As best as we can do that. What mistakes do pastors make?
How long do we have? Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, so the first problem is something you've already flagged. As soon as you move into the Jesus is divine, there's already a sense of yanking him out of his context and a desire, I think, to make him seem unique. Yeah. So in quite a lot of preaching, which runs the gamut from very liberal Christians to very, very conservative ones, Jesus winds up being the only person who cares about love of God or love of neighbor. He invents social justice. He invents women's rights and the pantsuit, right? He invents universalism over against a kind of narrow, xenophobic, parochial Jewish system. He invents general worship as opposed to something that's simply temple-based, right? As if Christians somehow don't go to church, right? So he becomes the inventor of everything that we like, and consequently, the background, the Jewish context, becomes in the preaching moment the model of everything that we don't like.
Right. Right. So we take Jesus totally out of context.
Completely. And it's the model of making Judaism look bad in order to make Jesus look good, which strikes me as silly because I think Jesus looks fabulous. and I don't have to make Judaism look bad in order to make him look good. To the contrary, I can show, and I do show, how he draws on his own Jewish tradition.
Well, I was going to say, to discount the Jewish aspect of the story is to discount the Jewish heritage that was so significant for Jesus.
More than that, it's theologically, I think, aberrant.
Right.
Because if you leave out what the church would call the Old Testament, I'm okay with the term Old Testament, by the way, as long as you remember that old is fabulous, good, bedrock, essential. I'm old.
That's right.
Then we're starting in the middle of the story.
Right.
So if Jesus is going to talk about Torah, then we have to know how biblical law is interpreted. If he's going to talk about women, then it helps to know who are the women in his tradition from whom he might have drawn some strength. And I have a feeling that Mary told him a couple of those stories when he was a kid. So we have to know the Old Testament background, and we have to know how Jews at the time of Jesus are interpreting this text, because you can't go back and look at Leviticus and say, oh, that's what they're doing in the year 29.
Right. Any
more than you can go back to 1 Corinthians and say, that's what's happening in the church today.
Right.
To some extent it is, but a lot of it isn't.
Right.
Right. Most of you are not worried about meat offered to idols. So how do we bring the tradition forward and then embed Jesus within it? And then it seems to me he becomes infinitely more interesting, and then we can figure out why people are listening to him in the first place.
Right. For those of you who may not know, AJ and I have been friends for a long time. You were the New Testament professor at Vanderbilt. I got to know you through our mutual friend Ben Witherington, and he made our introduction, and your whole one of your, I say, pet peeves, one of the things you always challenge me on is not understanding Jesus being fully Jewish in these moments.
Correct.
And trying to make him a 21st century
but again, how would you? Right? Because in seminary training, generally what happens is, or general New Testament courses, although some of them are better, you get an introductory lecture of Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Zealots, and then it's Jews all the way down, and Jesus over against rather than Jesus within.
Right.
Or you get some negative comment from rabbinic literature, which people in Christian seminaries don't read, that comes from the 5th century after Jesus. Retroject that back into the 1st century, make that what all Jews do, and then Jesus looks good in comparison.
Right.
And that's that nasty game of comparing problematic statements from one tradition with really good statements from another tradition. I can do the same thing by looking at what I would consider to be extremely progressive rabbinic statements, and then looking at some of the statements in the New Testament and going, boy, look at how much better the rabbinic system is.
Right.
That's not a fair game. It's bad history, and it leads to bad theology.
Another thing that you and I have talked about is how many times I, as a pastor, our churches are anti-Semitic and don't realize it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
In the same way that people in positions of privilege don't recognize their privilege.
Right.
Or people who might code white don't realize what people of color might have to go through. Just think walking in the mall
Right.
and seeing who's following you or who's crossing to the other side of the street. And it
or as a black friend of mine reminded me, he said, if I leave the mall with a bag in my hand from the most expensive store, but I'm following a white woman out, I will measure my steps so I don't get too close to her.
It's not a question of, I think, conscience bigotry. It's simply how folks are raised. And we frequently don't hear our own bigoted comments.
Right.
Back when I first started teaching, I taught for 9 years at a very good liberal arts school called Swarthmore College in Philadelphia before moving to Vanderbilt. Only woman in the Department of Religion. And the department chair would sometimes pick up the office phone and he'd call out something like, AJ, girlfriend on the phone. And, when the girlfriend is some senior professor at some other institution, and I get on the phone, so who was that? Or AJ, if you need something, then the girl will do it.
Yeah.
Right? And the girl was the department secretary who was in her late 50s. And when I pointed out to the department chair, this is in the 1980s, Mrs. So-and-so does not like being called the girl. He's, oh, no, the girl doesn't mind. Not recognizing that she is not in a position where she can complain because her job's on the line.
Right.
This is a fellow who was married, who had 2 daughters of whom he was very, very proud. He simply could not hear how offensive his comments were. So what I can do in the classroom or in workshops is to say, you may be saying the following in a Bible study, or you may be saying the following from the pulpit.
Such as?
Well, unlike the Jews, Jesus cared about women. Or those Jews who hated Gentiles, but Jesus talks to a Samaritan woman. Or the Jews thought that ritual purity was the most important thing ever, and Jesus dismisses purity laws. He doesn't. He actually restores people to states of ritual purity. It's exactly the opposite.
Right.
Or Jews are all legalistic, and Jesus invents the, let's be a little bit loosey-goosey. Oh, no, I think Jesus is actually tightening up the Torah rather than making it looser. Right? The Torah says don't commit adultery. He says don't think about it. That's
if
harder.
It crosses your mind.
Right, you're already in trouble. Right? If your eye offends you, pluck it out. We're like, I'm not going to go that far, but I get the point.
Yeah.
So it's that they're not intending to make Judaism look awful, but they're doing it all the same, and they simply don't hear it. As soon as someone says, the Jews think, we're already in trouble because there's no head Jew to tell us what to think. We're an ethnic group. And we have a variety of different ways of thinking. Or unlike the Jews, Jesus something. Which would be a kind of stupid thing to say because Jesus is a Jew and all the other people who are following him are Jews. It's an entire Jewish environment, except for an occasional Gentile centurion or Samaritan lady walking through.
Steps in to make the story interesting.
Pretty much.
Yeah, go with that. So
pretty much.
That's stuff. So give me some clue. Give me some hints on if I want to make my preaching more aware.
Well, the easiest thing to do, you should study. And you should read, of course, everything that I've written because that's helpful because I flag all this stuff. But the easiest thing to do, and this is what I told my students very, very early on. When my children were little, I used to bring them to school. So springtime, it's Passover. So my kids are going to the Jewish day school. They're off school. So I bring them into my New Testament class, and I sit my 2 little ones in the front row with my son with his kippah on, right? And I say to them, when you preach or teach, I want you to picture these little kids in the front pew.
Wow.
And do not say anything that will hurt these children, and do not say anything that will cause a member of your congregation to hurt these children. And if that's insufficiently manipulative, picture me in the back row. because I really care about Jesus.
You're right.
And if I hear the Jesus tradition being deformed in any way, or if I hear you preach something that's anti-Semitic or bigoted or should not be there, I'm going to stand up in the back of your church. And the last thing you want is a middle-aged angry woman standing up in the back of your church. And you know.
That makes me sweat right now. Just
That's why we have air conditioning.
That's right.
But you know, at the end of that service, I'm going to be in your face at the meet and greet.
Well, you and another friend of ours, Rob, used to always say, we're going to come to your church Sunday and all of that. I'm glad I retired or stepped down before that happened. This is A.J. Levine. She is the former New Testament professor at Vanderbilt University. She has written a number of books. Two of my favorites are The Pharisees and this one, Jesus for Everyone, Not Just for Christians. AJ, thank you for being with us today. I'm Mike Glenn. This is the Engaged Church Network podcast. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for tuning in to the Engaged Church Network podcast. We exist to train healthy and skilled leaders for congregations throughout Middle Tennessee. If today's episode helped you, share it with a fellow leader. And don't forget to visit engagedchurchnetwork.com for more ways to grow.